Not hours, not days when the body is still intact and the hope of a mistake is still technically possible. 4 days. In first-century Jewish understanding, and this detail matters, the soul was believed to linger near the body for 3 days after death before finally departing. By the 4th day, there was no ambiguity, no possible misunderstanding. Lazarus of Bethany was dead. His body was in the tomb, and according to his sister Martha, the decomposition had already begun. Jesus knew all of this when he finally arrived. The story begins a few days earlier. Jesus was across the Jordan River in the region where John the Baptist had first baptized, when a message arrived from Mary and Martha, the 2 sisters of Lazarus who lived in Bethany, a small village about 3 kilometers from Jerusalem. The message was simple and urgent. "Lord, the one you love is sick." They did not ask him to come immediately. They did not need to. They simply stated the fact, trusting that the relationship, the love, was enough to communicate the urgency. The one you love is sick. Jesus received the message, and then he did something that his disciples and the sisters and everyone watching this story could not understand. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. John chapter 11 verse 6 says it plainly. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He waited, deliberately, intentionally, while his friend died. While Mary and Martha sat in their house in Bethany watching the person they loved most in the world struggle to breathe and then stop breathing and then be wrapped in burial cloths and placed in a tomb. Jesus was not far away. He was close enough that a messenger had already made the journey. He could have left immediately and arrived before Lazarus died, and he chose not to. Why? He tells his disciples directly, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." He was not being cruel. He was building the condition under which what was about to happen would be unmistakable. Not a healing at a distance. Not a recovery that might be explained away as coincidence or misdiagnosis. He was waiting until the situation was so far beyond human possibility that what he was about to do would speak for itself across 2,000 years. When Jesus finally told the disciples they were going to Bethany, they were terrified. The religious leaders in Jerusalem had recently tried to stone Jesus, going back into Judea where Bethany was felt like walking into a trap. Thomas, whose name history has attached to doubt, said something in that moment that deserves far more credit than it usually gets. He said, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That is not the statement of a doubter. That is the statement of a man who had decided that wherever Jesus went, he would go too, even toward death. When Jesus arrived at the outskirts of Bethany, Martha came out to meet him. Mary stayed in the house, and Martha said the words that every grieving person who has ever prayed and waited and not seen the answer has said. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." There is no accusation in those words. There is love and grief and the specific kind of pain that comes from believing in someone completely and watching something terrible happen anyway. She was not abandoning her faith in Jesus. She was telling him the truth about how much it hurt that he had not come. And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha, thinking he meant the resurrection at the last day, said yes, she knew that. And Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said yes. Then Mary came, and she fell at his feet and said the same thing Martha had said. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her weeping and the other mourners weeping with her, something happened that the text describes with a word that means deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He asked where Lazarus had been laid, and then the shortest verse in the entire Bible. John 11 verse 35. Jesus wept. 2 words. In all of the great literature of the ancient world, in all of the religious texts of every tradition, there is nothing quite like this moment. The God who had just declared himself to be the resurrection and the life, who already knew with absolute certainty what he was about to do, stood at the tomb of his friend and cried. He was not crying because he did not know what came next. He cried because grief is real, because death is an enemy, Because the pain of the people he loved was his pain too. Because being fully God did not prevent him from being fully present to the weight of what death does to the people left behind. The people watching said, "See how he loved him." When they arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across the entrance, Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha immediately objected. "Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." 4 days. She was being practical. She was trying to protect him from the reality of what was inside. And Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" They rolled the stone away. Jesus looked upward and prayed aloud, not because he needed to, he said, but so that the people standing there would hear and believe that the Father had sent him. And then he called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The text says the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." In the most understated conclusion to the most dramatic miracle in the gospel, Lazarus walked out of his own tomb. The man who had been dead for 4 days, whose body his own sister had said already smelled of death, stood there in the afternoon light of Bethany, alive. The response was not uniform celebration. John chapter 11, verse 45 says many of the people who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But others went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. And the chief priests and Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin and said, "What are we accomplishing? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him." The miracle that gave Lazarus his life back was the event that formally sealed the decision to take Jesus' life. The raising of Lazarus is not simply a miracle story. It is the pivot point of the entire Gospel of John, the moment where the trajectory toward the cross becomes irreversible. Jesus knew this. He raised Lazarus knowing exactly what it would cost him. He went to Bethany anyway. He called the name of his friend knowing what the call would trigger. He wept at the tomb of the man he was about to raise from the dead. Because the point was never just the miracle. The point was the love behind it, a love that weeps and waits and goes anyway and calls into the darkness and is not surprised when the darkness answers back. "I am the resurrection and the life." He said it before the tomb was opened. He said it while Lazarus was still dead inside. He said it not as a future possibility, but as a present fact. That is who he was. That is who he is.